What's up, guys? Welcome to another broken episode. We're going on 2 months now of complete shoulder destruction. Hopefully the surgery will be scheduled soon. But in the meantime, I can't be out there doing stuff like I want to be. But you guys are on it, and you're always sending me like some crazy questions. I've been getting a lot of comments and DMs and stuff. So I figured we'd do another Q&A wildlife style video. I got a question this time that prompted this one. There's a couple of them, and this is not the first time that someone has asked me a question along these lines. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about it. I think that there's two kinds of people out there: the kind of person that would ask this question, and then the kind of person who would think that question is weird. And it's definitely not bad at all. There are no bad questions. Because you don't get answers to things that you don't ask. So I would never look down on anybody for asking questions, but I will give you my opinion on this one. And let's just jump right into it. I'm going to go ahead and read the question. So the question from a comment on one of my videos is, Brent, you own the RF 1-500 and the 800 f11 and the R5. So here's my question. If you take a picture with the R5 with the built-in crop mode, to get a 17 megapixel image, how does it compare to an image shot on the R5 with the 800 f11? If you don't crop anymore, which image is better? The crop image from the R5 plus crop mode plus 1-500, or the R5 with the 800? The bird will be about the same size in both situations, but I tend to believe that the better would give me a better image. I think that last part is a little wonky with how you wrote that, but I got the idea. All right, so like I've said, this is not the first time that someone has asked me a similar question, and this is what brings up the topic of the day, really, is like, how are you guys thinking about wildlife and about photography in general? And I think that I'm not going to say it's bad, I'm just going to say it's definitely different from the way that I think of it, and I'm going to maybe talk about like why I think of it not like this. So first of all, when we're talking about image quality, we can, especially in this niche specific instance where we're talking about the R5, the 1-500, and the 800, this definitely, I think, translates to pretty much anything in other systems that would be similar. But for now, we're talking about the R5, 1-500, and 800. In that case, the image quality out of both of those lenses, the IQ that you can obtain from both of those lenses on the R5 is great. And it really comes down to pixel peeping in a lot of cases, like which would be better. But here's the difference in like my line of thinking, my train of thought, and maybe the person who asked this question, and maybe yours, I don't know. It's situationally dependent. And I know people hate hearing that, but hear me out on this. I think asking a question like this is too simple. And what do I mean by that? It means that I can't give you a simple answer because it's just not black and white. It's not 0 to 100. It's not this or that. I can't say which one will be better because it depends on the situation. And I think you need to look at the bigger picture here in terms of like, what kind of photography are you doing? What are you planning on getting out of this, out of your photography? What genres are you in? Even if you're just in wildlife alone. The problem I have with the 800 is that, well, I have a number of problems, and I have this lens and I love this lens, and you guys, if you have watched my channel, then you know, or if you're new here and you don't know, I do use the 800 a lot, and I have many videos with it and about it and for it and all of that stuff. So you can check those out in my wildlife playlist and whatnot. But as much as I love that lens, I love it because I understand it. And that's the huge thing that you need to like wrap your head around, is like understanding something, its limits, and what you can get out of it within those limits. And context is super important. So within the context of I love the 800, I also understand its limitations. And because of those limitations, I tend to gravitate towards my 1-500 more. And this is situationally dependent because I'm fortunate enough that I have both and that I have the option to choose. You may not have both, you may not have the option to choose, but regardless, this is something to think about. So the thing is about getting, yes, I can get great image quality out of the R5 and the 800. And yes, I have gotten great image quality out of the R5 with anything that I've put on it, and I've gotten great image quality out of the 800 no matter what body I've had on it, whether it's the R5, the R6, the R6 Mark II, the R7, the RP, the R. I've had it on a lot of bodies, and I personally have gotten what I consider images that I'm fine with, that I'm very happy with, that are very good from the 800. However, my photography skills and my wildlife knowledge, all of that combined, understanding the limits of the lens, I know when I can get a good image out of the 800 and I know when I can't. And I think the problem is, like, for one, you're asking a question here about what I would think is a very specific thing. So you've already alluded to birds, so maybe you're a birding photographer only. Is that the only thing you're ever going to shoot? Even within birding, the only time that I really grab my 800 ever anymore is like ducks. You know, winter ducks, ducks on a pond, ducks on a lake, ducks in the ocean, wherever you're going to see your ducks. If you can't get super close to them, but even still, ducks on a bright day. I live in New Mexico. I've got 330 days of sunshine a year where I live. So light is not a problem for me with the F11. But the 800, like on a bad day, like where we have a lot of heat haze, again, I live in the desert, so heat haze is real even in the wintertime. All of these things come into play. Atmospheric distortion, air quality, all of that are going to be an issue, but they're also going to be exaggerated by longer focal lengths. So, you know, shooting with an 800, if you're trying to shoot something farther away, you're shooting through more atmosphere. That's a problem. So you've got to think about physics, because like I've said in many of my videos, physics is not your friend. It's just not. It is against you. Optical physics, the world, nature, physics, chemistry, all of that, it's against you in photography, especially in wildlife photography, and especially with long focal lengths. But then you also have to consider things like aperture. You know, the 1:500 is faster at f7.1, and then you have to consider things like, I mean, it can, I think personally, after having used these lenses for a long time, I do feel that the 1:500 is generally sharper, and that's not empirical. I don't have specific data or tests to prove that. That's just how I feel. And I also feel that I get keeper rates that are much higher with my 1:500 in general because of the autofocus and that kind of stuff. You know, that makes all of these things, they make a difference in how you're using the lens, what the lens is capable of, and what you're going to be able to get out of it. So just to me, I feel like, you know, I would gravitate towards my 1:500 more than the 800. So that takes care of the first part of the question. The second part of the question is really coming down to your acceptance of crop mode. So, you know, trying to get the best image possible, well, that's subjective, but I also think that there's a lot of ways to do that that don't necessarily require technical things. What do I mean by that? I mean that you could have something in the R5 and the 800, let's say, that is technically a good image. Like, it may be sharp, it may be good lighting, whatever, good contrast, all of that. But, you know, you could, with the same thing, with, and that could be 45 megapixel, but with the 17 megapixel in the R5 and the crop mode or whatever, maybe you had a better image in terms of, maybe you had better lighting, maybe you were closer to the subject, maybe it was a different subject, maybe the composition was better. All of these things factor into, you know, because you're on the R5 and the 1:500, maybe your ISO is lower, so that results in a cleaner image, because the higher ISO, the softer your image is going to get. Maybe you have a more blown out background because you're at 7.1 instead of f11. And maybe that like helps because you have like a really distracting background and it makes it more pleasing. All of these things come into play to determine the subjective image quality in terms of like, how do I feel when I look at this image? And I think that's really overlooked because people tend to, we have consumerism just forced down our throats like so much in our everyday lives these days, that especially in photography, like, we kind of forget the art aspect of it, and we kind of forget that there's more to photography than just technical specs. And that's pretty mind-blowing to me. I mean, I'm an artist. I've been an artist my whole life. I've been drawing, painting, you know, whatever, creating video, photos. anything. I love to create. So I'm always just trying to think about the creation and the story, and a little bit less about the technical stuff. You know, I've always said that gear doesn't matter until it does, and I stand by that. There are some things for which gear and technical specs absolutely matter, but all I'm trying to say here is that, like, thinking about how an image makes you feel is sometimes more important than the technical specs of the image, in terms of like, oh, I shot this perfectly and I did everything by the book and I got the best image quality possible because this is 45, this is 17. You know, sometimes none of that stuff matters, is all I'm trying to say. Sometimes that stuff takes a back burner to how an image makes you feel. And if a 17 megapixel image looks better to you and it makes you feel better because of the story that it's telling, because of the light, the composition, the subject, whatever, then that's more important than a technically better 45 megapixel image. Thinking about, especially in terms of megapixels, the last thing I want to touch on that I've touched on many, many times in many other videos, but maybe you're new here, or maybe you haven't seen those videos, even if you're not new here. Megapixels, like, what are you doing with this image that you're obsessed with having as many megapixels as possible? If you genuinely need to crop a 45 megapixel into a 17 or less megapixel image, and you just, like, your life depends on that crop, well, then you need it, okay? But 99.99999% of people are not going to be finding themselves in that situation. Never had any clients come up to me and tell me in any way, like whether I print an image and sell it to them, whether I'm doing a commercial photo shoot for them, whether it's for their websites or whatever. I have never once in over 10 years of being a professional photographer had a client complain about the resolution of my cameras, nor have they ever even asked. I have never had any client ever in 10 years ask me, what's the megapixels of this image? I have had clients say, yeah, I would like a high quality image, but that's about as far as it goes, you know? So when you're asking about a crop image at 17 megapixels versus image quality from a 45 megapixel, obviously, technically speaking, the 45 megapixel is going to be the technically better image. But again, you have to define what's better. And again, that may be situationally dependent, because with the R5 and the 800, you're going to be a lot more limited to being able to get that better, technically better image, in my mind at least, and in my experience, than with the R5 and the 1 to 500, because you can either crop in post or you can put it in the crop mode. But the point is, more often for me, especially because I don't just shoot landscape, I'm in wildlife, I shoot landscape, I shoot astro, I shoot portraits, I shoot commercial sports, I shoot all kinds of things. The 1 to 500 is just my bread and butter. It's the better lens for me. It's also weather sealed. The AF is better. All of these things, you know, they all add up to being a better lens for me. So you have to ask yourself, what lens is going to be better for you? If you're only shooting ducks in a pond on bright days through minimal atmospheric distortion, then maybe the 800 is going to be awesome for you every time because you want to get as close as possible. I don't know. That's just my 2 cents and a lot of rambling, but it's just a different way of thinking, and maybe hopefully that will help you think about things, or, you know, reorient your priorities for your questions and for your own photography, because that's what it comes down to. I can't give people advice like this because on certain things, because I'm different than you. I have a different situation than you. I have different gear than you. I have a different priorities than you. I have a different mindset than you. And then everybody, like, we're all completely different. So the subjectiveness of this kind of stuff really takes over. And at the end of the day, you just have to sit down with yourself and think about, like, what kind of situations you would get in when you're asking this versus that gear type of questions. You know, sit down and think, like, well, when would I have an R5 with a 1 to 500 in crop mode, and what would I be shooting with the RF 800 and the R5, and how would I be limited? And, you know, those are the kind of things that you have to ask yourself. Personally, I couldn't care less. I'll crop the image after having already been in crop mode, and I'll post a 2 megapixel image on my social media, and nobody will ever be able to tell, as long as it's bigger than 1080 on the long side, or these days I've been doing 2160 on the long side. As long as it's better than that, nobody's going to notice. As long as the image looks good and it's sharp and the lighting and composition are awesome, nobody's going to notice, I promise you. And even if you're printing, this is like the only thing that I have. This is like a test print that I did. But I shot that deer with, I think, my 1:400 when I first got the R5. And there was another deer in the shot, and I may have put it in crop mode, but then I cropped it in. Like that image, like this is a crop of a crop, and this is in low light at ISO 12,800. This is ridiculous in terms of technical settings. This is like what most people would consider horrible. Like those, and if you pixel peep on it, the deer will look soft, but, and you probably see some noise in the shadows because, again, ISO 12,800. But I cropped in on it until I got the composition that I really liked, because I got the story that I wanted out of this lone buck with the backlight coming in and a beautiful setting. And it just made me feel good to have that composition. So I chose to not worry about the smallness of because again, it was still bigger than 1080 on the long side. And then these days you can upscale, you can get your Topaz or your Photoshop or whatever, and you can like upscale images again, and like that's pretty powerful. You can also denoise the crap out of things these days. My point is technology is helping overcome some of those previous technical limitations. But my point is also that I printed that huge I've printed that for a number of clients, and I've never had anyone complain about it, because if they're wanting that image, they want it because it speaks to them, because they like it, and they're not, at least not to me, they're not going to nitpick it. I don't know, maybe, and if they were, maybe they wouldn't want to buy it. I don't know, maybe they just wanted to buy it to support me. Maybe they have no clue about the technical specs at all. Like most people that are buying photography art, don't know anything about megapixels or shutter speed or ISO or aperture, or they say, oh man, you should have shot that with a 600 f4 and you would have blurred that background. Those kind of people aren't going to be buying my images. They're going to be shooting their own, Like my whole point here is that, does it really matter to you? And if it does, then go with the higher megapixel. I think ultimately what I'm really trying to say is like, quit worrying about the little stuff. The more you make images, the more you will find images that you're happy with, the better you'll get as a photographer. It can't be understated in wildlife, especially too, like I've said a million times, getting close to the wildlife is more important than anything. If you can get closer to it, which you can, it's not easy. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of time, and maybe even things like camo and blinds and learning animal behavior and all of that stuff. But when you do all of that stuff and you put in the time and you put in the effort and you put in, the suffering of laying down there in the cold or the hot or whatever for hours on end in a blind to get closer, you will get better images. You will get better images than being farther away, standing up, away on the shore, whatever, with a longer lens in crop mode. I promise you, when you put the effort into wildlife, eventually you will start getting better images. Your keeper rate may be really small because wildlife is like the most difficult thing. It doesn't cooperate no matter how much, you might want it to. But those types of things are more important than anything else, is the ability to understand the animals and your ability to have some patience and get close, do what it takes to get closer to them safely, of course, Those are my thoughts. Those kind of things to me will always outweigh the technical specs of a certain camera and lens combination or technical settings or whatever. The more you shoot, the better you will get with the technical settings, and the more you will understand your own photography enough to answer these questions that you have, because you'll understand yourself better. And I think that's the biggest thing that anybody can do. So I don't know if this helped at all. I don't know if that was complete rambling for, I've been filming for 26 minutes now. Hopefully I'll try to cut that down a little bit. But I don't know. That's just like my insight as another random guy on the internet who likes to take pictures and who has done it for quite a while. But if you have any other questions, or if you have any thoughts about like my thought process, the questioner's thought process, whatever, leave those in the comments. I love having the discussions. I love talking with you guys down there. I love the engagement, because you guys talk to each other too, and that ends up helping. I read a lot of the conversations that get started on my channel, you know, on comments, and I think it's just so awesome that the community, you know, we all have all of these different inputs. So coming together in a place like these videos to share them in the comments, it just benefits everybody. So I'm super stoked that you guys are so engaging and that you're still here after listening to me ramble forever. So I'm gonna wrap it up here. It's tea time. Thanks for watching. If you have any more questions or anything, leave them down below. Hopefully I will update you guys soon on my shoulder, my orthopedic consult coming up soon for the surgery. And hopefully I'll be back out in the field very soon with some more actual content. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.